Hello, this is Professor Broker, and this is your Chapter 4 lecture, Part 2, Market Forces of Supply and Demand. Let's go ahead and get started. So remember, we discussed in the last lecture sort of how the forces of supply and demand interact together to determine prices and quantities in our marketplaces. And that's where those prices come from that you see at the store, right? And we talked about the market clearing price, how there's an equilibrium price in every market that will clear the market of excess. It'll clear the market of excess supply so we don't oversupply resources to certain productions, and the equilibrium price will also clear the market of excess demand. It will make sure that there's enough supply of resources to meet the demand of various buyers. The market, or the equilibrium price, clears the market of those imbalances, and it completely satisfies both supply and demand sides of the market. Okay, so that's equilibrium. Quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. It clears the market. That's very important. It's the market clearing price. We talked about that extensively, how when price is above, it creates a surplus, creates downward pressure on price. When the price is below equilibrium, it creates a shortage, and there's upward pressure on price. Okay. The title up there is a little bit out of format, but what is the right price for parking tags? So hopefully this won't be, well, I know this will be a little bit controversial, but I think an interesting case study to help us determine, where prices are in a marketplace and what truly is the market equilibrium price. Is it higher or lower than where it currently is? We can talk about student parking. So if I ask you the question, are parking tags on campus priced too high or too low? And I've surveyed students before on this topic, and the answer I most frequently get is that parking tags are priced too high. I think they're about $75 in the year 2015 at Murray State. And so, and most students will say that's too high. And I'm not taking a position on whether it's quote unquote too high or too low, but most students will say it's too high. Then if I ask, do you think there is usually more than enough, just enough, or not enough close parking spots for students on campus? If I kind of surveyed the students, of course it would depend on, when you're coming to campus and so on, but most students I've surveyed in the past have said there's not enough close parking spots for them when they're trying to, whether they're a red zone or whatever color zone they are. They usually say that there's not enough. That's the feeling, the sentiment I typically get. Okay, so now let's try to understand these two phenomena. Is it really possible? This is what I want us to think economically. I'm not arguing for a specific price for parking tags. Okay, I don't get any of that revenue. But I just want us to understand this phenomenon economically. Are those two ideas possible simultaneously? Is it possible that the price is quote unquote too high and there's not enough parking spots? Well, let's look at our basic supply and demand model. We have the price of parking on campus up here on the y-axis, the quantity of parking on the x-axis. We draw an upward sloping supply, downward sloping demand. If you tell me there's not enough closed parking spots, what is that saying? Right? That's saying that there's more demand than there is supply. Where would we be on our graph if that was true? Right? Let's just say P1 and Q1 are equilibrium. Okay? If there's not enough closed parking spots, which most students tell me is true, where would we be on this graph? We would be down here, wouldn't we? Right? The current price would actually be below, it would have to be below equilibrium for there to be a shortage, which is what students often tell me. They tell me, well, there's not enough closed parking spots, which is the same thing as a shortage. And so if there's a shortage based on market forces, that's telling me the current price is actually below equilibrium, not above it. Now, that doesn't tell us anything about whether it's morally too high or too low. I'm not taking a position on that. I'm simply saying, economically speaking, we're actually probably below equilibrium if there's not enough closed parking spots for students, right? And so given market economics, are prices for parking really too high or too low? Well, again, I just think it would be difficult to argue that they're too high if there's a shortage present, right? Because again, market forces, if there's a shortage, the appropriate action for price is to rise even higher than it currently is. And then what would be the market solution to eliminate this shortage? Again, the market solution would be to allow the price to go even higher. I'm not assuming that will make students very happy at all. I'm not suggesting that should be the official policy. But given market economics, what would higher prices potentially do to eliminate this shortage? It would do a couple of things. Number one, it might encourage the university to build more parking lots to be able to sell more parking tags, right? And so that could help eliminate the shortage. Number two, because it would be economically viable for them to do so. Number two, how would it affect the demand side? Well, there are numerous students and faculty that live in and around campus. I'll just give you an example. I'm one of them. I actually don't live that far from campus, and I buy a parking tag, and I typically drive to campus. I could easily ride a bike. I could also walk to campus. I mean, I live that close. And I tell you, if the price of a parking tag got, high enough, I for sure would consider not buying one and just walking or riding my bike to campus. That would free up one potential parking spot, that could either, maybe stay a blue zone or maybe be converted to a red zone. Again, and I'm assuming I'm not alone in that. And so again, that would be representative of a movement up and to the left along the demand curve as the price rose. These are forces that would undoubtedly take place as the price rose. So this is just a nice case study, case example of prices. It doesn't mean that we have to be happy about where prices are and what the equilibrium price is. It just means, what are the market forces, what kind of forces are going on here. Okay, so remember, we talked about the law of demand and how that creates downward sloping demand curves. We talked about how as the price rises, quantity demanded decreases. Okay, that's moving up and to the left. As the price goes down, that increases quantity demanded. That moves us down and to the right. Okay, the law of demand, price and quantity demanded move in opposite directions. But when we're in equilibrium, or I should say, like when I'm drawing a demand curve, okay, I'm taking a snapshot. Okay, let me go back here. This is a snapshot of a demand curve. If this was the demand for corn, that's a snapshot. Okay, things are constantly. If it was reality, things are constantly changing. That can shift this demand curve one direction or the other. And when I just simply draw the demand curve, I'm controlling for those other factors. Okay, other than price that can affect demand. Now, if something other than price, okay, because the demand curve is a function of price and quantity demanded, but if something other than price changes, like income or tastes and preferences, that's not going to move us along our demand curve. That's going to shift our demand curve one way or another. Okay, and that's what we want to talk about here. So let's just say we have, this pendulum right here. If nothing happens, if there's no force applied to it, right, then these are just going to remain still. But if I add in, this other pendulum and I pull it and I hit these, then of course that's going to apply an exogenous force that's going to knock these out of equilibrium to a new, potentially a new equilibrium. Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about with our demand curve. What are some of these outside forces that can hit our market, our demand specifically, and basically shifting it one way or the other. Okay, well, price does not shift our demand curve. We're going to talk extensively about this. This is very important. If the price of a good changes, okay, if I'm looking at the demand for corn and the price of corn changes, that does not shift our demand curve for corn. That moves us along our existing demand curve for corn, okay? But if the number of buyers changes, if the income changes, if the price of related goods changes, if tastes and preferences changes, if expectations change, or if special factors change, these things can shift our demand curve. That's what we want to talk about. Okay? If we have an increase in demand, this is very important. There is a rightward parallel shift because at every price quantity combination, there is now more demand for the good or service. Okay? I don't want you to shift it up. Okay? A lot of people think, oh, demand increases, so I'm going to shift it up. I want you to think about it as a rightward shift. The reason is because when we talk about supply, if you think about it in terms of up and down shifts, you're going to get the answers wrong a lot of the time because supply, when it increases, actually doesn't shift up, but it does shift to the right. Okay, and so that's the same thing with demand. Demand shifts to the right if it increases, okay, and to the left if it decreases. Again, think about it as right and left shifts. Okay, right and left parallel shifts. So if the number of buyers increases, okay, then that will increase quantity demanded at each price, shifting the demand curve to the right. If Murray State population doubled in size, my guess is there'd be more buyers potentially for pizza, so the demand for pizza would probably go up. The demand for lots of things would probably go up. If the number of students at Murray State doubled, right? It would shift our demand curve. It would increase it. Same thing if it decreased, right? It would shift to the left. Now I want you to think about income, right? Income can influence demand. If someone's income goes up, they have more money. Do they always buy more of everything? Okay. Well, let's think about it. What about eating out? Someone's maybe this woman got a promotion and she has more. Her and her husband now have more money, right? Their household has more money, and do you think that they would maybe everything else equal go out to eat more, go out to eat less? What do you think? Well, they would probably, if they had more income, a lot of people, if their income goes up, they eat out, especially at nice restaurants, they eat out more. Okay? Not less. Okay? So this is an example of a normal good for most people. Eating out at nice restaurants is a normal good. As your income goes up, it causes an increase in the quantity demanded for that good. Okay, these are called normal goods. Okay, but not everything is that way. So if your income goes up, your demand for normal goods will shift to the right. Okay, if your income goes down, your demand for normal goods will shift to the left. But not everything is that way. What about ramen noodles? Right? These are things that you might, I think of college students, and they seem to eat them up. They're cheap. It's a cheap meal, right? I used to eat them when I was in college. But a funny thing happened when I graduated college and got my first job, especially after my first several raises, right? All of a sudden, I noticed I wasn't buying ramen noodles anymore. Why is that, right? As my income went up, I actually bought less ramen noodles, okay? This is an example of an inferior good. That doesn't mean ramen noodles are like an economic bad, like they're they're toxic waste or anything. That's not what that means at all. It just simply means it's a definitional thing that means as your income goes up, there's some things that you're just going to buy less of, and as your income goes down, you might buy more of them. These are inferior goods. Okay. Another example might be, name brand, items at a store versus generic brand. The name brand stuff might be normal goods. As your income goes up, you buy more name brand products. Whereas if your income, goes up, you actually might buy less generic brand stuff. Okay. Again, this is an example between normal and inferior goods. Okay. For inferior goods, when your income goes up, your demand curve is actually going to decrease, shifting to the left. Okay. What about prices of related goods? Think about Coke and Pepsi, right? They're both soda, but if I'm looking at the demand for Coke, don't you think the demand for Pepsi matters, or the price of Pepsi matters? Absolutely, right? And so, if I'm looking at the demand for Coke and the price of Pepsi goes up, okay, goes up, what might happen to the demand for Coke, everything else equal? Well, if the price of Pepsi goes up, I would anticipate people buying less Pepsi because of the law of demand, and maybe switching over to Coke. Thus, if the price of Pepsi goes up, the demand for Coke should go up. This is an example of substitutes, goods that are viewed by consumers as substitutes. The price increase of a substitute will cause a demand increase in the good we're looking at. Okay, Coke and Pepsi, but not everything is that way. Some things are like peanut butter and jelly, or computer hardware and computer software, or coffee grounds and coffee filters, K-cups, coffee K-cups, and Keurig machines. Okay, these things are everything I just mentioned. They go together. They're not competing against one another. They go together, right? People buy peanut butter and jelly together, right, to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So if the price of jelly goes up, that probably won't increase the demand for peanut butter. In fact, it might decrease the demand for peanut butter, because as the price of jelly goes up, people are buying less jelly because of the law of demand. And if they're buying less jelly, that means they're also probably going to buy less peanut butter. These are complements, and complements move in the opposite direction. If the price of a complement goes up, the demand for the good we're looking at actually goes down, shifting to the left. Okay, so understand, with income, we need to understand two different types of income shifts. There's normal goods and there's inferior goods, and our demand will respond differently depending on whether it's normal or inferior. Same thing with prices of related goods. We need to know whether it's a substitute or a complement, because our demand will react differently depending on the answer to that question. If tastes and preferences change, then we would anticipate demand shifting. So for example, there's a big movement now for more like organic type and natural type foods in our food supply, less processed. Well, guess what? The market has responded by providing those things, and because consumer demand has shifted, increasing to the right for those types of products, thus increasing the price, providing an incentive for suppliers to provide those goods and produce. And shifting away, the demand has decreased for more processed foods, which you would anticipate would do what to price? Well, it would decrease price, which we'll get to when we put supply and demand together. Okay? What about expectations, right? If I expect milk prices to plummet in the near future, let's just say I'm a buyer, okay? How would that impact my demand today? Well, I actually might, not go. Maybe we were going to go buy some milk at the store, today for our family, but I expect milk prices to maybe I've got some insider information. Maybe my dairy farming family up in Michigan call me and tell me, hey, milk prices are going to plummet in 2 days. Well, then me and my wife might wait to buy our milk until 2 days from now so that we can go get cheaper milk, right? That's a simplistic example, but that's how expectations work. If I expect it to go down in the future, I actually might decrease my demand for milk today. If I expect milk prices to go up in the future, especially the near future, I might go increase my demand for milk today and go buy as much as I can at the current lower price. Okay, expectations. Also, expectations about income can matter. If people expect their income to rise, that can increase their demand for normal goods and decrease their demand for inferior goods, even though their income hasn't changed yet, right? So someone, maybe their boss walks in and tells somebody that they're going to get a 20% raise and it's going to start next month. Okay, well, they don't have the money yet, but my guess is they might take their family out to a nice dinner that night, right? Because they expect their income to go up in the future. And it works in the reverse as well. If you expect your income to go down, even if it hasn't happened yet, then that can actually decrease your demand for normal goods. And then, of course, there's always special factors. These are things, what if aliens invade the planet? Well, then, of course, that's going to affect the demand for these. But we don't have a nice little category for that. So we just lump them together and call them special events. Okay? So again, our list is, if the price changes, this does not, say we're looking at the market for corn, the price of corn changes. This does not shift our demand for corn. It simply moves along the existing demand curve. Okay, but the number of buyers, the income, price of related goods, taste and preferences, expectations, and special factors can all shift our demand shift our demand curve. Okay, now something I want to go through to explain the difference between a price change and a curve change and the different terminology we use in economics. Okay, let's just say I go to the store and my wife has asked me to pick up some cases of bottled water. Okay, and she expects me to bring home one case of bottled water, and I know the typical price that I'm expecting to pay. But say I go to the store and to buy one case, and I notice that actually we can save money by buying 3 cases. Okay, as in this picture. And so, I say, wow, that's a great deal. So I go ahead and I buy 3 cases. Okay? But in that context, I bought more water. Did my demand for water increase at the store? Or did my quantity demanded increase because of a lower price? Okay? Well, again, the way I described it, I did not have more demand for water. I simply bought more water because the price decreased. And that seems semantic and that seems very silly to most students, but that's actually a very important difference. My motivation changes how we structure and how we talk about and how we graph and the terminology we use when we talk about it. Okay, and so this scenario would simply be a change in quantity demanded caused by a lower price. We would not need to shift my individual demand curve for water. We would simply move down and to the right along my existing demand curve. Okay, very important. But what if I told you the temperatures were rising outside and maybe it was the start of summer and maybe temperatures are rising? And maybe my family typically buys 1 case of water, but because we're thirstier, we're drinking more because of the hot temperatures, I go to the store and regardless of the price, I buy 2 cases of water. Okay? Well, 1 more than normal. Well, then what would that showcase? Okay? Would that be a change in quantity demanded changed by the price? Of course not. That would be a change in demand. Our demand for water increased because of the rising temperatures. Okay, so do you see the difference? In one case, the price changed and I bought more water. In another case, a non-price factor changed, okay, and me and my family bought more water. Okay, one is called a change in quantity demanded, the other is called a change in demand. Okay, graphically speaking, we observe it this way. A movement from A to B is a movement down and to the right along an existing demand curve caused by a change in price from P1 to P2. This is like me buying an extra couple cases of water because the price is cheap. Okay, that's a change in quantity demand. However, a movement from B to C, okay, is caused by a shift in the demand curve caused by some non-price factor, like the temperatures outside being hotter. And this would be like me and my family buying more cases of water because it's hotter outside. Okay? And so that would be called a change in demand. It's very important to understand the difference between a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. Now, let's talk about supply real quick. Okay? The law of supply, like we said, is simply the claim that as the price goes up, quantity supplied increases. We can get an upward sloping supply curve like so. However, this supply curve is a snapshot. Okay? It is controlling for all other non-price factors that could be changing. And so what happens when we change those non-price factors? Well, we get a supply curve shift. Okay? Just like with demand, if one of these other things, these non-price determinants, comes in and affects our equilibrium, boom, okay, then we are going to get a new supply curve that has shifted in the marketplace. Okay? So, again, if the price changes, we do not shift our supply curve. We move up or down our supply curve. But if some of these non-price factors like input costs for firms, if technology changes, if the number of sellers change, if expectations change, or if special factors change, these things can shift our supply curve. Okay, so here we have a supply curve. Now, how would we show an increase in supply? Some students will say, well, if we have an increase in supply, we need to shift it up. Okay, that would be incorrect because an increase in supply needs to go to the right. So again, don't think about increases and decreases as up and down in supply and demand. Think about it as a rightward shift and a leftward shift. Okay, an increase in supply, just like an increase in demand, okay, is an increase is a rightward shift, and a decrease in supply is a leftward shift of the supply curve. Okay, again, implying that as we increase supply, okay, suppliers are willing and able to sell and produce their product at every price. As we decrease supply, suppliers are less willing and able to supply the product at every given price, so there's less supply. Okay? Now, what if the number of sellers increases, right? What if we get a bunch of new pizza suppliers in Murray, Kentucky? Well, that would undoubtedly increase, if we increase the number of pizza shops, that would undoubtedly increase the quantity supplied of pizza at each price, so the supply curve would shift to the right. Okay? More sellers, more supply. Less sellers, less supply. Input prices, input costs. Well, an increase in an input price or an input cost makes production less profitable. And again, suppliers increase their production when they think they can make more money, and they decrease their supply when they don't think they can make as much money. So as the input costs, say the energy prices, say energy prices are rising, okay? And maybe it's the price of oil, maybe it's some other factor, but energy prices are rising, that would make production less profitable. And that would actually lead firms to be less willing and able to produce at each price, shifting supply curves to the left. And the reverse would be true. If energy prices start going down, we would anticipate an increase in supply in most industries because of the higher profitability. Okay, so input prices. Technology. Okay, technology determines how many inputs or how much inputs are required to produce a unit of output, right? And so the advent of new technology, maybe new machinery, maybe new software at a firm, or so on and so forth, this technology can help make a firm more profitable by lowering the input costs, because it can actually reduce the number of inputs they need to produce. Well, we just learned if we lower input costs, what does that do to the potential profitability for the firm? It increases it. If it increases the potential profitability, then our supply curve would shift to the right. So new technology, we will typically model that as an increase in supply to the right. Okay, new technology. Here's a good example. Boeing used to paint their aircraft with teams of painters, but their new aircraft, they're actually using some robotics. Manually, it would take a team of painters about 4.5 hours to do just one coat. Okay, on these aircraft. Okay, just one coat of paint. The robots can do the complete job in 24 minutes. That's multiple coats of paint in just 24 minutes. You can think of the time savings there, right? Boeing began using the machine in February. This was, I think, in 2013 or 2014. By the midsummer, all of the wings and the aircraft will be painted this way. Okay, well, what does technology like this do to Boeing costs? Profit, supply capabilities. Well, again, undoubtedly, there's probably some upfront cost to get the robots, but over time, this is going to dramatically reduce the costs, right, of at least painting their aircraft. Thus, if everything else is constant, in producing their aircraft, their costs will go down, their input time will go down. Thus, their potential profitability could go up, increasing their supply capabilities, right? This is an increase in supply to the right. Now, something else I like to talk about with this is how does technology adoption affect workers? Okay, well, clearly the most obvious impact is that that team of painters, right, might lose their job, right? They might not. I mean, if the robots are doing it, then this team of painters might have to be transitioned to other departments, or they might even not be able to work at Boeing anymore. They might have to transition to other industries and other jobs. Okay, so that's clearly a negative. Now, sometimes students stop there, though. They say, oh, well, it's clearly a negative for workers. Well, that might not, always be so. Are there any potential positives? Well, something I'd like students to think about is, where did these robots come from? Did they just come out of thin air? Well, of course not. Somebody had to make them, right? And so workers, a lot of advanced robotics and advanced machinery is actually made in the United States. And so, workers, probably American workers, actually had to make these robots. If Boeing didn't buy these robots, that could have negatively affected workers in the United States as well. And so some workers benefited while some lost. What other group might be affected? How about consumers? Everything else constant. If it's cheaper for Boeing to make their airplanes and they want to compete with their other competitors around the world, they might be willing to offer lower prices for their aircraft to airlines who might pass those cost savings on to the consumers in terms of lower ticket prices, right? So again, consumers could very well benefit from this adoption of technology through lower prices through the back end. So what does this sound of technology adoption? What does it sound an awful lot like, right? If you remember from chapter 3, this analysis should sound very similar to the analysis of trade, right? Trade it hurts some workers, it helps some workers, right? Different groups, and then it undoubtedly helps consumers through lower prices. Technology adoption is a very similar analysis, okay? And then firm expectations. In general, sellers can adjust supply when their expectations of future prices change. This is not true for perishable goods, right? If I harvest my bananas, say I'm a banana farmer, I cannot wait 6 months to take them to market because they will go bad, right? And so, but if I'm harvesting non-perishable goods, like say oil, then maybe I'm an oil producer and I'm extracting oil. I can sort of decide when I'm not going to take that to market, right? Because it's not going to perish. So let's talk about that. My expectations. Let's just say that there's events in the Middle East lead to expectations of higher oil prices. Now, sometimes the reverse is true. Sometimes events in the Middle East lead to expectations of lower oil prices, which is probably currently the scenario. Okay, but for right now, let's just assume maybe I'm an oil producer and I expect oil prices to go higher in the near future from where they are right now. How could I maximize my profits today, right? Well, it would actually make sense for me to take less of my supply to market today so that I can save it and take it to market in 6 months when I think the market price is going to be higher for oil, right? And so if I expect future prices, I'm a seller, if I expect future prices to be higher in the future, I'm going to decrease my supply today. Conversely, if I think future prices are going to be lower, then I'm going to take my oil or my product to market today to try to capture those prices, right? But in this scenario, if I expect prices to be higher in the future, this will decrease the supply to the left. And then, of course, there's always special factors, right? Droughts and major weather phenomenon destroying crops. These can be special factors that affect the supply in various markets. Okay, and so again, we have price changes that move us along existing supply curves. We have input cost changes, technology, number of sellers, expectations, and special factors that all shift our supply curve, either increasing to the right or decreasing to the left. Just like in demand, if we have a change in price, that simply changes our quantity supplied. If we move from point A to point B, that would be caused by an increase in the price moving us up to the right along our existing supply curve. That would be a change in quantity demanded. If, however, we had a non-price change, that could shift our supply curve, increasing it, say, and that would give us a shift from point B to C. We would call this a change in supply. Okay, very important to understand the difference between that terminology, change in supply caused by a non-price factor and a shift in the curve, change in quantity supplied caused by a change in price moves us along our existing supply curve, change in demand, shifting in the demand curve caused by a non-price factor, and a change in quantity demanded is a movement along a fixed demand curve caused by a change in price.